my mouth and the thoughts and meditations of our hearts be ever acceptable unto your God, our strength and our deliverer. Amen. A new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And two midwives rebelled against his orders. Their names are Shipra and Puah. Now, yet another good story to come during the month of women. And noting that this is the last Sunday in the month of women, and also in the Anglican Church, the month of compassion, as I said at the beginning of the service, we have a story that I think can be said to bring all to culmination in a sense. Now, this story reminded me of a human rights organization in our country, which was founded by 6 white middle-class women: Jean Sinclair, Ruth Foley, Elizabeth McLaren, Tasia Pebas, Jean Bosaza, and Helen Newton Thompson. The organization was initially named Women's Defense of the Constitution League, but was later called Black Sash. Black Sash because there's a habit, at least to something of their uniform, of wearing a black sash across their breasts. Now, it's something similar to, you've seen a deacon's stole that goes across like that, as opposed to a priest's stole that either falls down or is crossed in the front. They wore a sash similar to that, except that it went the other way, from the right shoulder that way. Now, their anti-apartheid activities started initially with a campaign against the removal of colored people from the voters' roll of the Cape Province. That's quite some time ago. As apartheid began to pick momentum, also Black Sash gained momentum. And so they're known for their protests in street corners outside Parliament and in other notable places, challenging, protesting and demonstrating against past laws and other apartheid laws. They later opened an advice office to provide information concerning the legal right of black people of all shades and all backgrounds. Between the 1950s and 1994, Black Sash was a prominent and visible proof of white resistance to apartheid. They worked as volunteers. They worked as advocates to families affected by apartheid laws, held regular anti-apartheid demonstrations, spoke in public meetings, brought cases of injustice to the attention of members of parliament, and kept vigils outside of parliament and outside of government offices. Now, many of them were vilified in their communities, especially by those who supported the apartheid system. Now, one of their prominent members, who at a later stage became the leader of the organization, her name is Sheena Duncan. She's long passed to the other side. Sheena was an Anglican who was one of the first lay canons. I'm sure you've heard of lay canons in our cathedral, in our diocese, lay honorary canons in our diocese. And she was made lay canon a few years just before the ordination of women could be promulgated in our church. She was also during that same time chair of the South African Council of Churches from 1987 to 1990. I remember being bamboozled when I went to the cathedral just as a normal, small, little student when I was 16, 17 years of age. And that particular Sunday, Sheena Duncan was preaching. I will assure you, I don't remember what the sermon was about. It was just a jaw drop to see this icon up there at that high pulpit in the cathedral, a cathedral St. Mary the Virgin. So one can say that just as there were midwives who ultimately saved Moses' life, Shipra and Puah and all other women that they influenced in Egypt, there's always been midwives of what one might call God's purposes of freedom and of full humanity and of compassion from all backgrounds. We normally remember the march to Union Buildings that was led by Leland backgrounds, and most of them, including women, as something of midwives of freedom. You talk about the march to union buildings, the one that we normally talk about, the one that has led this country to set aside the 9th of August as a holiday, a national holiday. The Mothers Union was involved in it. Actually, the 9th of August is called Masemola Day, because that's her birthday, the founder of the Mothers Union. And some stories go about saying that that is how, partly how that march was a success. Probably word went around that on Masemola Day we were going to Pretoria, and the government understood nothing of it. And so there's been women in history who've been very much a part of the story of redemption and the story of compassion. We know much about compassion, but also big movements that have led to us celebrating the fullness of our humanity. Black Sash being one of them, and I don't think that we talk about them enough in our country. So these are a band of our, as our college says, of our ancestors, heroes of the faith and heroes of our nation that we need to talk more and more about and celebrate. Now, just to go back to the story from the Old Testament, normally when we read the story of the Exodus, we hear about Moses. If you are lucky, we hear about Mary, who sang a freedom song. But today's reading takes us to a band of women, 2 Hebrew women who were ordered by an Egyptian pharaoh who didn't know Joseph and didn't know how good relations were between the Egyptians and the Israelites ever since the time Joseph was sold into slavery and ultimately practically operated like something of a CFO, if you wish, of Egypt. This pharaoh knew nothing of it. He started oppressing the Israelites. Things changed, and he wanted to kill boy children. And for that purpose, he ordered these 2 midwives to kill every single Hebrew child just as they are born. They rebelled against that. And it seems that movement started growing in Egypt. The other midwives seem to have followed. Long story short, that's how Moses' life was saved. He was born and then lived because midwives refused to kill him. A papyrus basket was made for him, and he was deposited there in the Nile River, found by princes of the same Egyptian pharaoh. Now you see how cultures, races, women working together. And a Hebrew woman was then employed to come and look after him. Voila, the Exodus had started. And so when talk of women as mothers of big transitions, of liberation, of gospel, of compassion, there are stories. The Bible is littered with those. And that's why I think there was probably no better Sunday for this reading to be set aside, the Old Testament reading, than today in South Africa. So women have always been very much midwives of liberation. When we read the gospel reading, Peter asks his disciples, "What do the people say that I am?" Some say you're Elijah, some say you're John. And in this version, Jesus turns around and asks Peter, "And who do you say that?" Or the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers, "The Messiah, the Son of God." Now, the word Messiah, which means the anointed one, at the heart of it had redemption and liberation as its heartbeat. So when Israelites had Messiah, or when the Greeks had the Christ, that was something of a divine intervention in an oppressive situation that frees people spiritually, physically, mentally, and in all sorts of ways. And so, to put it together with this, a lot of the midwives that have led some of us, me, my grandmother, and my mother, to hearing about the Messiah, are the ones who are avengers of all these movements that talk about freedom. Last Sunday, we read of a nameless woman of great faith. This Sunday, we hear of the midwives, the daughter of a pharaoh, and many other women who made certain that God's purposes are revealed through Moses. And so, perhaps you are called on this last Sunday of Women's Day and the Sunday of Compassion to find out in ourselves if God might be calling us, male or female, to be midwives of greater freedoms in our country and in the world. There's so much oppression, so much being chained mentally, physically, and in other ways. We have the example of the Sheila Duncans and the Black Sash. We have the example of the midwives in our first reading today. We have, as it were, something of a midwife in Peter, saying it and proclaiming it publicly. This is the Messiah of God. And also, we hear something from Paul's letter to the Romans when he says, be renewed by the transformation of your hearts, the metanoia. Be renewed by the transformation, and do not be conformed to the ways of the world, especially the oppressive ways of the world. So as this month of women comes to an end, let us remember to be conformed in our inward beings, in spirit, heart, and mind. And here, when God calls us to be something of a midwife, even in impossible situations. Amen.